Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Psychology and Spirituality, a bridge to a better life discussion. Yeah, I'm your host, Marcia Trajano, and with me are Dr. Anahy Fonseca and Jussara Korngold. Hi, everyone. If this is the first time you're watching this podcast like program, please note that our program, the Psychology and Spirituality Weekly Talks, are based on the works by Joanna de Angelis. And we're here with her content, because we're offering this safe space to confront, compare, correlate, and expand spirituality concepts from a psychological lens, bringing to all of us some insights, some tips, advice, all of it to help us lead a better life. I am here with both of you because we're going to be talking about the notion that we're all searching for solitude. And I'd like just to bring a little bit here the fact, and this is words from Joanna de Angelis, when she says that modern society has witnessed unimaginable advances of knowledge and technology, yet we suffer through restlessness. And we're doing this realizing that while all of these achievements, they have somehow broadened our horizons of understanding, yet we're unable to solve our ongoing emotional challenges. But before we start our conversation, I would like to just recognize some organizations that are sponsoring our program: Mansão do Caminho, United States Spiritist Federation, International Spiritist Council. Thank you so much. And of course, the Spirit, AMI Brazil, and would love to also do a plug to the work of Jung in Brazil in August. But make sure that you take the time to hit subscribe if you haven't already done. And if you'd like to check our other channels, you can do so by going to spiritist.us. Finally, if you have any questions, any comments, any feedback, please do write them down in the chat window. I'd love to hear from you, and perhaps get some of your content or your feedback into a future episode. Jussara, Anahy, we have achieved so much. And as I said before, we are all just restless. We are alone. We're so empty, it feels like. And it feels somehow that we never have enough. Can one of you talk to me about that idea? How can we achieve a sense of solitude?
Well, hello everyone. So before I ask Jussara to join me, um, I wanted to think with you all that are listening to this podcast, like and watching us, why Joanna de Angelis talks about solitude in this beautiful book that she called Awakening of the Spirit. I think it's so beautiful that she wrote an entire book about awakening the spirit. Why is it so important for us to awaken our spirits? And in that psychology in Jung, because we all know that Joanna uses a lot of Jung and other authors, because she's intending to do this bridge of everything that the psychologists and psychiatrists have studied, written, and researched with spiritist knowledge and spiritist psychology. So I was wondering when we decided to have this talk about this title, Awakening the Spirit, and the times that we are living in. So, because Joanna talks about human beings, as Marcia said, kind of, she uses I love, the images that Joanna brings to us. She talks about this great and unimaginable flights of knowledge and technology. We are like airplanes, rockets, right? With lots of computers and internet and lots of technology, but struggling, surprised, she says, in the murky waters of restlessness and suffering, realizing that the millennia of culture and civilization that have broadened our horizons of
Hmm.
understanding did not solve the great emotional challenges. So I was wondering, and I wanted to give you us all an example of a client in the many, many years ago, um, uh, so that we can have start our discussion. And I would love to hear Jussara about that, about why Joanna writes an entire book on the necessity of awakening our spirits. And it was, I think, 15 or 20 years ago, this person that I remember, he kept saying, he came to me in psychotherapy, and he was a lawyer. Okay, he had a kind of success. He was a good lawyer with many clients. He was very well dressed, okay, very fashionable and all of that. And but he kept saying his main goal was to be what he called a super person.
Oh, I
And I,
love it. Right. So it's a, if I may. So you have a patient long time ago that he is looking for signals of external success, right?
exactly,
So yeah, go ahead.
exactly. And this in I have never heard the term super person. It's like Superman. Do you want to be Superman? No, it's not the comics. I want to be a super person. Then I said, okay, so describe to me what is a super person. And then he said, well, a super person, and a super person is that person that it's always, flying to meetings and to meet a lot of new people
Hmm.
and to meet professional challenges. So a super person would be always in the airport, of course,
Yeah,
right? And would be always in meetings. And Joanna talks about that a lot.
exactly. Yeah,
Always in meetings and encounters and challenges and this and that. Always in the persona, our social mask, in a sense. He didn't say the persona, he didn't know Jung, but he said,
hmm,
well, I want to be always meeting new people, new challenges, professional challenge, always in the airport, get into a plane, go into different places. I want to be a super person. And I said, okay. Because he was already was kind of successful. And he said, yes, but I want to always have a car, a nice car that I can take my clients. For instance, if I am in a meeting, that my clients can see me arrive in this car, a nice car, whatever, and to go to good restaurants and to have, all this stuff and nice parties. So for me, this would be a super person. He never said anything at that point about family,
yeah.
intimacy, that Joanna talks about, that the need for intimacy. He never said anything about feelings. And imagine that, people. He came for psychotherapy and for psychiatry evaluation because he was depressed.
Oh,
So Jonah talks a lot about that depression and anxiety, and people having, he had, let's say, a lot of what he wanted already. Then we are
hmm,
talking about the ego, his ego wanted, but he wanted more. more, even more, because to go, let's say, to traveling abroad once every few months, no, it was not enough. He wanted to be like every couple of weeks in the airplane, going interesting places and meeting new people, new challenges. They said, okay, but how is that going to take you out of the depression? And in his mind, he would say, well, because I will be a super person. And a super person, like, let's say, in his mind, okay, I'm simplifying because it's many,
Right.
many sessions and months talking about that. Um, it's almost like he didn't have insight about that, but his explanation would be he wouldn't have time to be depressed and,
Correct.
and he would have such pleasure meeting new people, new professional challenges, that he didn't understand why he was depressed. So he thought he was depressed because he was not a super person. He didn't have yet all of the amount of meetings, encounters, travels, cars, or whatever. So in his way of thinking, he was depressed because he was not a super person. So after the need that Joanna talks about, solitude, the need for solitude, the need for the murky waters of restlessness and suffering. He was restless, he was suffering, he was depressed, but he didn't realize why he was suffering. So Joanna talks about all this. She talks about the homo technologicals, all this technology that we have, and having an immense gap between the homo technologicals and the spiritual being. So, in my point of view, now, many, many years later, and I wish at that point I knew Joanna and I knew
Mm-hmm.
all her, writings, and because at that point I didn't have the idea. I was already starting to read Jung, okay,
Mm-hmm.
and depth psychology, but I was pretty much Freudian in a sense. Okay, let's talk about his complexes, his projections, and his identification with the father figure, the mother figure. This is the personal unconscious. This is a way
Correct.
of
Yeah.
thinking, but it doesn't answer. It helps a little, but it doesn't help the person to understand what it's really missing in a sense of his deep self, capital S, self capital, that Joanna talks about. She says the deep self. So we could think of higher self or Jung's self with capital S. So our higher consciousness, because the higher consciousness, according to Joanna, is our spiritual consciousness. So, okay, we can understand a little bit about our complexes and deal better with the challenges of the ego, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But to fill this gap that Joanna is talking about, this immense gap between all this technology, right? All these achievements that we have at this point as human beings, and all these pleasures of the ego, that
Mm-hmm.
if we work and stress ourselves too much in this material life, we can maybe achieve. But it doesn't explain the gap with the spiritual being that we are deep, very deep inside. And there's a calling these days that we understand better, that we awaken our spirit. So I will just ask Jussara to explain to us better from the spiritist point of view, knowledge. Why is this so important, Jussara? Do you think?
Okay, hi everyone. So good to be here. Hi, Marcia, Anahy. Um, Wow, you mentioned so many fascinating things, and this case that you brought, actually it made me very sad, in a way, because when it's so realistic, the idea of being a super person. But when I come and say, I mean, in a world that we have so much about superheroes, right? You come and say, I'm realistic. I want to be a super person. It means as well that you are preventing yourself from dreaming,
Mm.
from being creative. Um, you know, in the same token that I know that to become a super person is hard. Not a woman, of course. You wanted to become a super person, just look at a woman, right? I have to say that. Sorry, but I had to say that. That's what the world expects from us, right? To perform and to do everything in every field of life. Now you have, what I'm talking about. But then I was thinking, in his although reasonable request, he puts aside the dream, he puts aside the spirit, he puts aside the things that are important. And to him, is very much like many of us, the observers of, one time we talk about the celebrities, that 15 minutes of fame,
Mhm.
um, that when we look at them, it seems that they have, this glamorous life, and I want the glamorous life. But as you said, and I think it's very much in sync with what we are talking about here. Uh, he had already so much, but it was not enough.
Mhm.
Depression, and he thought that if he would be filling this void more,
Mhm.
having more things, and definitely maintaining his mind occupied, he wouldn't have to think about himself. And this is the awakening of the spirit that Joanna de Angelis talks about. There is one phrase that we like very much, and we repeat that a lot when we are talking about spiritism, from one of the books of Leon Denis, the writer, the spiritist researcher, in the book Life and Destiny, when he says that intelligence, in this sense we are talking about the intelligence of the spirit, lies dormant in plants, it dreams in animals, and only in humans does it awaken, become self-aware, take ownership of itself, and attain consciousness. So now we are in a human stage, but we are still trying to prolong those the reminder of those other states that kept us in slumber, so to say. I don't want to take responsibility. I don't want to have time to be with me and my thoughts. And when it comes to this topic that we are talking about today, the confrontation between us having to please and satisfy the demands of the ego versus what us as a spirit is longing. And it's for no other reason that also in the book Empty Lives, chapter 28, Joanna de Angelis mentions that when we look around, we have achieved so much in terms of knowledge, in terms of culture, technology, all of those things, but it's still, when we look at the moral structure of the being, it's not progressing in the same rate. And and the thing is, we are getting too distracted. today with all the devices that, that we have, and the resources, social media.
Mm,
People go to social media because they don't want to think about themselves, and they just want to look what others are doing and what should I be doing as well, like you were saying. And 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 for us to reach this state of fullness, of plenitude, we
mhm.
need to face ourselves. And this
Yeah,
is what the awakening of the spirit means, to know our purpose. And this is the
yeah,
purpose. The purpose is
yes.
not just to try to fill a void, it's to actually face us as an immortal spirit.
I love it. I love it. I wanted to perhaps bring a couple of thoughts that Joanna mentions, and it's in a. Now we're on her third book, right? We talked about the awakening of the spirit. We mentioned empty lives, and I'd like to perhaps bring another book that she wrote, the integral human being, and she brings that idea that we, you and I, right? All of us, we human beings, we live in two worlds, two universes: the concrete universe and the universe of abstract perceptions. But she mentions then that this culture that we immersed on, right? Both of you mentioned those the modern man, where there is so much of achievements, even in arts. And when I talk about art here, I mention perhaps theater, music, oh, video, films, novels. It's Jussara, when you talk about the dream and the imagination, that's where humanity brings a lot of good stuff, right? We create that imagination, we bring and we share. And as such, we then become observers, right? And the problem is when we become only observers, because what Joanna also mentions in that book is that as much as we may be distracted and prefer to observe the other, right? Including, I think, from a Freudian perspective, in the projections, right, Anahy? But we should be reminded that we can be observed, right? We are the object of someone else's observations, and we can also observe ourselves, right? We can become the observers who observe ourselves. And I think this is quite interesting, this concept of understanding that from escape mechanism. And Anahy, please correct me if I'm going too much in the left field here, but in the realm of escape mechanism, the ego, right? We project or we transfer, we look for the other or even things to avoid looking at ourselves. It's too painful to look at ourselves. But then she says we can really start to transform even our complexes and our unconscious conflicts into a notion of very powerful knowledge, because as observers, we start to protect ourselves from looking at the chaos that reside within. And I think your patient, Anahy, was just too scared. And I'm of course trying to read into something I don't know anything about. But I would say if it was me expressing the same types of behavior or thoughts, it would be just this incredible fear to look at all the conflicts, all the chaos that resides within myself, right? But Joanna, back again in her book, The Integral Human Being, she says, when we're able to observe and put that distance, observe ourselves, but put that safety, we are now able to avoid what would be otherwise unbearable to us. Maybe, and the figure that comes to my mind is the Medusa, right? If you look at the Medusa, you become a stone. And Perseus, in the myth of the Medusa, he gets her to look at herself through the shield, as a mirror, and then she becomes, right, she turns into stone and he's able to kill her. But the idea here is that the separation between the subject, me, and the object, myself, will give us that ability to start to experience everything that I go through, including the inner chaos and their potential destructive effects, right? So if we start to be able to get the tool to be brave, to be courageous, to look at ourselves, we may be able to convert what could be this anguish, this anxiety, this idea that restless and state of mind to just the best of the best. I love what you said, Jussara, in the quote by Leon Denis in the book After Death, right? Where we hear that idea that awareness is where humanity awakens. And so it all comes together with the idea that it is so critical for all of us to transfer that life, that external life, a life of form, right? To look at that external life of form and emotion so that we can be um, filled with the tools of reflections and looking ourselves and then looking at what are the real accomplishments, right? And I think, Anahy, just to finalize what I'm saying here, is the fact that your patient could only see external grasping for what is validated by our material world in the sense of power, including the superpower, be everywhere, do everything, have all the check marks of what is to be successful. And yet, for us to be truly successful, we need to look at ourselves, to look at our emotion in that idea of consciousness. At that point, we're ready to attain our solitude. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's great the way that you guys have put everything together. And I was I was listening to you, and of course remembering other moments of that case in this in psychotherapy. And we all know that the ego has its defense mechanisms, right?
Right.
And Joanna also says that the ego is because Jung says that the ego is one of the complexes of the
Mm-hmm.
self, related to the self, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, uh, so, of course, it's something really hard if you are Freudian, because for Freudians, there's only the ego consciousness, right? So that there is a higher consciousness that utilizes the ego, that it's the ego would be the center of our consciousness in this
Mm-hmm.
personality, but it's actually okay the main probably consciousness that is doing the work, okay,
Mm-hmm.
because we have complexes, as Marcia said. So complexes
Mm-hmm.
are the little people inside of ourselves, the inner child, the complex of the father, the mother, other complexes. But so Joanna says that the ego, uh, this is this complex, this consciousness, the ego
Mm-hmm.
consciousness, is like an achievement of the self. And
Yep.
if we put together the spiritist knowledge, of course, we are here. This life is very precious. As Jussara said about Leon Denis, that it's beautiful, it's very
Yes.
poetic, this evolution that he talks about of actually is of the spirit, the being conscious of itself, but closer than or manifesting the divine psyche, because Joanna de Angelis also says the human being aiming to promote the ego, to the detriment of the self. If we forget that we have this higher self, this higher
Yeah.
consciousness,
Yeah.
moves away from the divine psyche, she says, its origin and its goal. So our origin and our goal, just as Leon Denis says, right, Jussara? So what I'm thinking is that, okay, so we have gotten at this point in our spiritual evolution the right to be here, the right to live in this personality, this moment, at this moment, with this ego, let's say, with this consciousness. So it's a right, it's an achievement of our spirit. Okay, it's let's say it's the result of a lot of struggles for broaden our consciousness, as Jussara said, that we have got to this point. But the trick is that the ego doesn't know about that until it
Mhm.
knows. Because Joanna also talks about individuation. She talks about Abraham Maslow, the
Yes.
psychologist, American psychologist, great. So our needs in the spiritual growth, and in the development of our development in this personality, it's great. But so Jung's concept of individuation, that exactly as Jussara said, that to develop, to express the potentials of our soul. So Jussara was talking about creativity, intuition,
Yes.
that Joanna talks about in this, when she talks about the need for solitude, the need, as Marcia said, to for us to observe ourselves, to know ourselves deeply in this life. But I understand, and that client, that patient of mine was in the beginning of a process. He was more
Mhm.
or less, I think, he was less than 40, so he was
Mm.
his late 30s, right?
Uh-huh.
So there's also the cycle of life here that we live. So in this, at this point in our
Mm.
psychology, we are pretty much still in the ego phase, developing the ego. We haven't got to the point that we call middle age. That today is like more 50s than 40s middle age, more or less. We are correcting in psychology all the ages, because we are, thanks God, and we are living a lot. So we are going slower in a sense in the process of individuation, but we are having this great opportunity to get old,
Yeah.
develop wisdom, and to really understand our individuation. So that it's basically to develop all the potentialities of our soul, of our psyche here in this life, to learn whatever we decided to learn as spirits, and to manifest this. And as Joanna says, to move not away from the divine psyche, but towards the divine psyche, right?
Mhm.
Towards God, and that it's our goal, spiritually speaking. So, what Marcia was talking about, us observing ourselves, the psyche. So, this need for solitude, we have
Mhm.
to understand, I think, from the psychological point of view, that why is that so easy for the ego?
Mm.
As Joanna is warning us, pay attention. For us to, oh, I like Freudians say, well, that there is the the needs, the desires, right? That come from within, from the unconscious, and then we have the super ego saying, no, no, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't try to do that, and then the ego is in the middle of the stuff, that it's what Freud discovered, in a sense,
Mhm.
how the ego has to protect itself and then develop mechanisms of defense. But we are like 100 and at least 100 and more years from this way of thinking about our psyche, that Freud started, and then Jung goes deeper, and then Joanna is going even deeper, right? So, but we have to understand that, for instance, for that client, he was pretty much, as Marcia said, defending himself.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, from his complexes. So all psychotherapy, it is a kind of a moment of solitude, because you are
Mm-hmm.
going together with a psychotherapist, but really doing what Marcia was talking, really trying to observe yourself with the
Yeah.
help of someone that is doing like an auxiliary ego, let's say. Oh, but you told me that and that, and how does that relate? Something like that. But with the objective aiming to strengthen the ego, to make it a little more mature,
Correct.
so
Yeah.
that we can have this strength to like to face ourselves, as Marcia was saying, because the ego has to do this job, and it's not easy. The ego, being the center of our consciousness, is doing all the observation, analysis, and at some point, when we are mature enough, we know, even if we don't know with our ego consciousness, then the self, our higher self, starts manifesting more, like as Jussara said, through dreams, creativity, insights, intuitions, synchronicities. And then at some point, the ego, I think he's kind of there's a bombarding the
Yeah.
self is bombarding the ego. He said, "Okay, I give up. What do you want to talk about?" Something like that. But when we get a little older, that's why it's so important for us to get older. To
Yeah.
don't be afraid of old age, because it's wisdom, people. And this
I
observation,
love it. I have to stop to say thank you. I must confess, everyone, that I'm struggling as I reach my third, right? The remaining of the days. I am struggling with something that I never thought I would, but it is this beautiful invitation. Let us welcome every wrinkle, every new year, every new source of wisdom, because that's when we finally get to the point that let go of the superpower, the illusion of
yes,
superpower, and become our true super, if I may say, self, right? The authentic self.
perfect. Because so we need to have less fear, as Marcia was talking about. We need to make our egos stronger, more
Mhm.
mature, but not doing like, we when we spoil a child. I
Yeah.
want this, I want that, I want to be younger, I want this surgery, I want this food, for instance, I want this and that. No, we have to discipline ourselves, and to do that, we need to acknowledge, okay, our complexes, our, the needs of the ego, and just put everybody to talk, like in United Nations, right? United complexes. Okay, let's sit here around the table, like Sir Arthur. We talked once about that.
Yeah,
And
that's so
why?
sorry.
Because we need this to get closer to our higher selves. And this is made in solitude, not in parties, not struggling. Of course, we need to work and we need this and that, but not overdoing it.
Yeah.
And this need for observation, I love when Jonah talks about the divine psyche, and she talks a lot about cosmic consciousness.
Correct.
Because if
Hmm.
we are sparkles of this divine psyche, of
Yeah.
God, the transcendent, however you want to call, God, if we are sparkles, and so we need to awaken, as Jussara was saying, our potentialities, the potentialities of our souls. So all this divine psyche is in a sense, it is also within us, we could say. Of course, we are in the little bits that we can manifest, the little lights that we can manifest. If it's little in the beginning, because we know that, for instance, I love the name, I think it's his Hebrew name of Jesus as Joshua, right?
Yes.
Yes, Joshua. So that's his real name. That he said, everything that I do, you can do yourselves, right?
And
And
better, and better, right?
better.
Yeah.
But how is that? In solitude. You would live.
Perhaps more.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we have to just watch out for the inflation of the ego, right? But one of the things that I wanted to talk before we leave, and just surfing the wave that you guys just provoked, that Joanna talks about self-realization. And it reminded me that what is you guys think she's talking about when she says the lack of time for self-realization? What do you understand that she means about self-realization that we can achieve through solitude, meditation, and this self-analysis that Marcia and Jussara were talking about? What do you guys think that she meant by self-realization?
Yeah,
Just
one thing that in all that you were saying, and Marcia as well commented before, we have to remember that human beings are, like as she says here, are gregarious beings, right? So we need life in society, and we learn from each other. And as Marcia was talking before, in terms of observation, why it is easier for us to learn about imperfections and virtues when we are observing others, because we have blind spots when analyzing ourselves. Maybe not that much in relation to virtues, but of course, definitely in relation to imperfections. So when I start observing others and start looking at their behavior, and if I take the time to, to really analyze, I don't think this is a good way of doing things or behaving towards others. The next question should be this self-realization in terms of, asking yourself the question, do I do that as well? And when I have the courage to face it, when the self-awareness, I guess, that goes along with self-realization, which is always, I like to emphasize that, it never with a name of putting us down, but really observing ourselves and say, I may like myself. I may think that I'm a great person, but I want to be a super person, right? I want to be better. And
Yeah.
how can I be better if I don't look at myself? And one of the things that it says here, although we need this time and to reflect upon ourselves and where we are now, where we've been, because it's good for us to think about where we were before compared to where we are now, to see our progress. I mean, even if you are stagnant, it's not that bad. It's not good, but it's not that bad. And there she mentions one thing, that we are social animals. We need this contact with each other. We learn from each other, and that's why, I mean, we have people with so many different talents, because I have to rely upon others to do things that I cannot do. And I mean, and she's so in tune with science that when we see the pyramid of Maslow, for instance, she
Mm-hmm.
mentions, I mean, that, or better yet, he mentions, like, when we are more in the primitive stage, we are just thinking about our psychological needs: food, water, shelter. Then it's my safety, my security. But then comes a third point where she mentions here, I cannot live without love and
Yes.
the sensation of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
That is why, she says, if we do not go after situations or, relationships that can provide this kind of emotional content to us. And again, according to Maslow, we don't even go to the next step with is self-esteem. Because if I'm not loved, liked, accepted, have this, you know, uh, uh, conscience of belonging,
Mm-hmm.
how can I value myself and what I am? So it's a stage, as she says here. We go from one point to the other, and it's interesting because we talked about Leon Denis and what he says, and she said this whole process of maturation, you know, is with an aim to awake the dormant inner potentialities that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And this
Mm-hmm.
is where it comes self-realization. When I say, oh my God, I'm all of a sudden I have to face a totally different scenario. Let's talk about ourselves, right, Marcia? We
Yeah.
had to go from one country to another, or many, and it was so many different scenarios and upbringings and all that, and we had to reinvent ourselves. And
Yes.
knowing that we could do that was absolutely great. Having this self-realization, I don't know how I did it, but somehow it was in me. There was a potentiality that was dormant and I didn't know that I have. So if we give the opportunity for this to happen, it is going to happen.
I'd like to perhaps answer to Anahy's question, right? When she asked what is self-realization, and I love that you discussed the Maslow's pyramid, right? But you mentioned that if you go all the way and if you don't love, you cannot go any further. And my words here, Anahy, before we close, is that is exactly at the center of this discussion today, because we must love, but we also, most important, need to self love, to look at ourselves and accept all that we are in our chaotic content of my inner world or not, but the ability to accept, to love, is when I can easily attain that sense of solitude, which is being in harmony on my own, because I know who I am, or I'm learning to know who I am, and I'm okay with that. I love myself regardless.
Great. And finally, fulfillment, our own potentiality, as we said.
Yes.
I just wanted to finish then with a small but beautiful sentence by Joanna de Angelis
Yes.
that I think it's says everything that we have been talking about. She says, "It is in silence that one can find God, enjoy peace, unravel enigmas, and self improve." Isn't that beautiful? So
It
we
is.
all need a little more silence and solitude.
Absolutely. Love it. Thank you. Thank you both for being here and tackling a subject that is particularly important to me. And I would like to invite all of you who are here watching this program with us to come back next week. Thank you and have a wonderful time.
Bye bye.
Bye.